AAAAA. 59. The breach of human rights in Latin America. When human rights are transgressed, there are cases of discrimination, insecurity, violence, among others. Although this type of abuse has always been present in the history of man, it is alarming that in modern times they continue to occur. In Latin America this is a very serious problem, and it must be analyzed to carry out the necessary measures. For it is shameful to live in a country where the rights of a person can be trampled so easily. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was approved more than 60 years ago. Its objective was to establish a list of freedoms and faculties that all people possess, without exception. Also, the horrors that were part of the Second World War are among the causes that motivated the nations for the creation of this document. However, taking into account what was mentioned at the beginning, it is worth reflecting on the effectiveness of these rights, because they are clearly denied and belittled by different organisms. In Latin America, as well as in other parts of the world, news about police or military forces appears, acting on the side of human rights, of both criminals and innocent people. Many times, this is a product of their limited ability to deal with mafias or criminal groups of different kinds. There are cases of torture, disappearances, and even executions. All this is carried out by agents of the state, whose actions are often left in impunity. Either individually or collectively, there is a considerable number of people who have seen their rights transgressed in a systematic way. There is no equity, equality, or inclusion. And the absence of these values ends up generating a vicious circle characterized by structural violence. Then, the challenges in terms of human rights are gigantic. The objective of every country should be to maintain a sustainable development that goes hand in hand with justice. En varios países de América del Sur hay una fuerte presencia de desigualdad social, un acceso elitista a la educación y precariedad en la salud pública. En el Perú, por ejemplo, existen casos de gente inocente que permanece encarcelada de manera indefinida, culpada de supuestas actividades subversivas. Esto es un reflejo de gobiernos ineficientes, corruptos o que prefieren el crecimiento económico antes que resolver esta clase de problemas. The fulfillment of human rights in Latin America needs the collaboration of all people. Each one must do his part by making public the abuses he has suffered, through the internet or other means of communication. Well, it is not enough to talk about it, but actions must be carried out to create a social conscience. Solidarity and respect for life will allow humanity to cooperate with each other to protect the ethical values of a world where injustices do not exist. AAAAA. 60. The presence of machismo and inequality in today's world. Currently there are many movements, mostly led by women, who seek to oppose machismo and how it is established in modern society. However, it is necessary to understand that this ideology, conformed by a series of attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs, is an intrinsic part of civilization as we know it, and it is quite complicated to oppose something that is taught subliminally in schools and through of the media. In order to find a way to combat machismo, it is essential to analyze in a rough way the reality in which we live, where it is usually perceived as something normal that does not deserve due attention. The raised compliments are seen as flattery and emotional abuse is justified as a couple theme. Even physical violence against women is in the background for supposedly valid causes, such as jealousy or the consumption of alcoholic beverages. In this way, alarming figures that reveal cases of abuse are left aside, being considered as the result of accidents or other convenient excuse. The problem of all this is not in the number of women who are mistreated or in the gender inequality that many of them have to endure, but in the macho thought that is defended by both men and women. There are innumerable surveys where people have stated that these cases can be justified on certain occasions, or even in all circumstances. Starting from this point, we already realize that machismo is seen as something natural. Thanks to the fact that the internet is connected to most of the world, there is now a better notion of the cases of abuse and injustice provoked by machismo. This has also aroused the concern of its defenders, who see their privileges at risk and decide to ram violently with the classic speech full of intolerance. However, it is necessary to clarify that there are extreme feminist movements that incur the same mistakes, seeking to impose their ideas through articles, videos, and marches, often resorting to physical or verbal aggression in public places and in discussion panels. The conclusion of all this is that both machismo and feminism are concepts that should be studied in depth to understand that they are based on inequality. Women today have access to more opportunities than the average man, their life expectancy is greater, and even in some countries there are more violations suffered by men. All this is usually omitted when talking about machismo, revealing that both ideologies have no place in an equitable society. CCAA 61 Child abuse as a multidimensional phenomenon. Despite the great advances that we have experienced in the area of human rights, innumerable cases of child abuse continue to exist in today's society. This reality is quite regrettable, and is part of all countries, regardless of their level of development, cultural or social. The child is a helpless being at the mercy of adults. He is innocent and ignores the world, and is exposed to all kinds of situations that threaten his physical and mental health. The abuse is multidimensional, and for this reason it can be somewhat complicated to establish a definition of its scope and consequences. Although in recent years it has been studied with greater emphasis, even now many variables about its detonators are unknown. In general terms, it includes all those non-accidental injuries that negatively affect the infant's body or mind. The actions carried out by its perpetrators undermine the child's normal development, affecting it physically, psychologically, and emotionally. It is worth mentioning that although the majority of cases occur within the family environment, it is also frequent in the study centers or in other places where the child is supposed to be safe. This reveals the importance of knowing in depth the people who will come into contact with the little ones, especially when dealing with situations where it is difficult to maintain control of everything that happens. Child maltreatment does not only involve violence, since it can be abandonment caused by the negligence of parents or guardians. Here are children who are not able to meet their basic needs, such as food, clothing, health, and safety. Also, the impediment to education has proven to be one of the most serious problems, which can lead to labor exploitation. In this way, they are forced to work in the streets without the possibility of receiving the necessary education for their development. People who incur these abuses have usually been victims of them in their childhood, creating a cycle that apparently has no end. However, it is also possible that parents or caregivers have a low level of schooling, limiting their financial possibilities and expressing their frustrations in children. In the worst case, the abuse will have an origin in pathologies or mental disorders, and will even be linked to the consumption of alcohol and other addictive substances. All this makes it necessary to carry out awareness campaigns on the subject, as well as efficient programs to protect the little ones. Each government is obliged to create helplines and institutions that can prevent child abuse, because if it is not stopped in time, it is very possible that fatal outcomes will occur. 62 Animal abuse and its evolution in society. Before, animal abuse was seen as normal, as many of them were used for cargo work or for the entertainment of the masses. The latter was usual in ancient Rome, where bloody spectacles were performed that were applauded by the plebs and the upper class. The victims were thousands of animals of various species, which had been captured in India and Africa. Nowadays, there are still cases that make us question the moral integrity of many people. In the Roman Colosseum there were two types of shows. One consisted of violent and deadly confrontations between the gladiators, while the other was the Venationese. This was the name given to the hunts of exotic animals, but it also involved the fight between men and beasts. They were events that were advertised painting facades, tombs, and houses, as it happens with the current advertising posters. Although the above can be inconceivable in modern society, there is a practice that shares many similarities, I mean bullfighting. According to its proponents, it is part of the culture of certain countries and represents an art form. However, none of this justifies them, it is only a macabre exhibition of animal abuse. Even, sometimes the bulls are beaten before they start, with the only excuse of giving the killer the advantage to make everything more entertaining and receive the applause of a sadistic audience. Another kind of animal abuse is found in circuses. Children are amazed at the spectacular creatures that appear in front of them, and are captivated when they perform pirouettes and other tricks. But what they do not know, is that these behaviors are motivated by the physical abuse that animals suffer. Many of them are locked after each function, without food or light. They practically live in a prison, where their captors force them to follow their orders. In case they do not, they will be sacrificed or mistreated until they learn to do so. In some zoos a similar situation also occurs. The animals remain locked up for too long, something incompatible with their free nature, causing their health to deteriorate badly. The owners of these establishments do not take into account any of this, and prefer to continue to profit and use them as exhibition pieces. Then, with this brief analysis on the subject, we can realize that there are still many people who do not have scruples and who prefer to mistreat animals in pursuit of money. In the case of bullfights, they try to justify themselves with amoral arguments that make culture or art an excuse. This brings to light an alarming reality, and shows us that society maintains violent and sadistic vices of several centuries ago. CC 63. The evolution of atheism and its position on the belief in a God. Many people, for different reasons, go through an existentialist stage. This motivates the appearance of questions about the meaning of life. In this way, it is inevitable that they come into conflict with the religious doctrine that has been imparted to them in the school, the family, or as a custom of a community. In some cases they end up opting for agnosticism, and do not completely invalidate the possibility of a God. While others prefer to adopt philosophical or scientific positions, discarding any form of magical religious thought. This is what is known as atheism, and in this essay I will analyze its origins and characteristics. In the etymological aspect, it is a term whose origins are found in Latin, having been used in ancient Greece, where it was interpreted as without God. It should be mentioned that at first it was used in a pejorative way, because at this stage of history society rejected people who did not believe in the deities that most idolized. This changed from the appearance of free-thinking and rational skepticism, currents that were motivated by criticism of religions. Freethinkers take as a basis a philosophical perspective to argue that every statement must be supported by logic. For this it is necessary to apply an empirical criterion in terms of reason. The authority, traditions, and customs are in the background, because they resemble the dogmas that are unable to support their position objectively. People who practice free thinking seek to analyze and explain why their beliefs, a process that often leads to atheism. On the other hand, rational skepticism is a position dedicated to questioning any form of pseudoscience, but it also opposes claims that do not have sufficient empirical evidence. In this last group the religions are located, because their bases come into conflict with the logical reasoning and the scientific method. Religious criticism has been present since the first civilizations, being to a greater or lesser extent a great influence for the aforementioned positions. This can be seen in the work of Tito Lucrezio Caro, a poet and philosopher of Silgo IAC that manifested its rejection towards the religions, to consider them the cause of the creation of perfidious and impious institutions, which promote the irrationality in the individuals. Taking all this into consideration, we are currently faced with the new atheism, which adopts a more intolerant position on the subject. This movement establishes that the scientific progress that has been experienced in recent years is reason enough to adopt a less passive attitude against superstition and belief in a God.